So I've been getting a lot of messages in my inbox saying like, "Oh, when's your bass video coming out?" And here it is. So I've got 3 instances of Massive loaded up, each with a different preset from my pack of 40 sounds, which you can buy at ascianproductions.blogspot.com for only $9.99. In the description there's a link where you can hear some of the sounds and see if you want to buy them. This first preset is called Grabum, because that's kind of how it sounds. You can see the name of the preset in the top right in case that made no sense. And this is what it sounds like. So kind of like a bit of a nasty kind of re-sound. I've also got that one and that one. Those are all Fs, just played in different octaves. Okay, what I've done to the project since the last video is I've taken these tracks and I've frozen them by right-clicking on them and going to freeze, which would normally be here. And what that does is basically, instead of Ableton playing MIDI and all the effects, it's essentially bounced down to audio. So instead of going along and playing the MIDI that's there, it's actually playing the audio. It's just kind of silently bounced itself. And the effect of that is it saves CPU, because we're going to be doing a lot of processing with these basses, and what you don't want is for this CPU meter to go broop and either crash Ableton or, you know, have latency issues and stuff like that. So the first and the reason I've picked these 3 basses is because they're kind of sonically, the characteristics are different, and I'll basically be showing you 3 different ways to process basses and get a whole range of sounds. This first one we're going to be using some frequency splitting, processing the bands individually, and then using sampler to mangle the sample a little bit. So first things first, we need to bounce it down to audio so we can start processing. I've created an 8-bar MIDI note, and it's just an F of an F1. F1. So I'm going to go ahead and call this bass 1. The other thing I've also done is grouped these 3 MIDI channels into a MIDI group, because then if we're not satisfied with the audio after, we can go back and change the MIDI and just, you know, pop it into the frequency bands. So let's hit record. Wait, this is really quiet. I'm just going to turn that up and re-record that. You can see that it's sort of phasing in and out and creating a lot of movement by itself. So it's got a lot of movement already. What we're going to do is collapse this and you know, mute all those. Come into this view. I'm going to use one of the methods I made a video about for splitting frequency bands. And I'm going to, if you haven't seen those videos, just go to my channel, and I've made 2 videos on 2 different ways of splitting frequency bands in Ableton. So this one is with auto filter. I'm just going to grab my presets, which you can download from the description of that first video. So by adding these presets I made, we're now split into low, rumble, mid, which is the sort of crunch and power of the sound, and the high, which is the phasey detail. Alright, we're just quickly going to listen to them all together, analyse the characteristics, and then just going to turn it down quickly, and then see how we're going to be processing it. So it goes down at the start and then phases back up, creating like a separation and some sort of fine detail here. It's going to It's nice and choppy. The sound's mainly about the mid-range, but the high end is what grabs your attention. So we're going to be beefing up the lows and mids and then adding some movement and interest to the highs. What I do with the low band, which is below 300 Hz, it really doesn't need much. I mean, it's quite, it doesn't have much detail anyway, so all I'm going to do is add a compressor and bring down the threshold until we can hear it getting a lot thicker. There we go. So just slightly thickening the sound. Onto the mid-range. The important thing to think about when you're processing basses is how the effects that you're adding are going to be affecting the sound, like the waveform, as you go on. So pretty much all processing needs to be done before these filters, and the reason for that is if you're adding, say, I don't know, a saturator, as soon as you boost it, you're distorting the signal and creating frequencies which weren't there before. So if you're cutting off at 315 Hz here and then saturating after, there's going to be some frequencies down to 300, 280, I don't know, but below the 315 barrier. So all sort of processing needs to be done before filters. Saturation, perfect way to beef up a sound. So I'm just going to give it a few decibels of drive. Next, because I want to be fattening up the mids, I'm going to add a camel fat, because I'm going to get rid of the compression in Magic EQ. The reason for adding this is that it has, as well as distortion section, which is really good, it has a filter section, and one of the things we want to be doing to the overall sound to accent the phasiness that it already has is creating movement. The perfect way to do that when you're designing basses is to add notch filters, which look like this. It takes out a section of the sound, and the idea is that you move the notch around a different frequency, but as fast or slow as you want, but in a certain frequency band. And you can even do sort of a few together. And that creates movement in the sound. So this has a notch filter. I'm going to add that, turn the filter on, a sine wave modulating the filter cutoff, and I'm going to lower the rate so it's moving really slowly but is making a difference to the sound. Add a bit of envelope, also bring the cutoff down, this is important, to around 750 Hz, which is the sort of midpoint of the mid bass. I'm going to route this with a sine wave and a slightly faster rate to the filter envelope. So it's creating a sort of a rise and fall type effect. If we take this off, it's all going. That's a little bit of those. Next up, I want another bit of movement, so I'm going to add a phaser and just sweep to find a nice area. That sounds quite nice. And I'm going to add a slow LFO. And take down the dry wet. Because a phaser is going to make it lose a lot of power because it's a time-based effect. So yeah, bring down the dry wet to about 30% roughly, and that adds a lot of movement. Another saturator. Saturation and distortion is going to be the main effect I'm using because, like I said, you just want to beef up the mid. Sounding good. I like the limiting. You'll hear me, because I'm thinking out loud, you'll hear me constantly analysing how what I'm doing is changing the sound. And, I mean, designing and producing basses is like very kind of hit and miss, because it goes through so much processing that when you start processing, it's so hard to visualize what the end result is going to be. But I find the most sort of easy methods of sound design when it comes to basses to be as you're going, analysing how it's changing the sound, and listen to it in context, and sort of decide what you're going to be doing next. It's nice and beefy, but maybe kind of dull, so I'm going to add some overdrive to the upper mids. To give it that lift. Take down the dry wet. Next, I'm going to add a flanger for a slight sort of 3D effect, but this is going to be very low in the mix. Right, listen to it in context. Sounding good, very, very thick. We need a bit more movement, so I'm going to add another camel fat. Again, notch filter, slightly higher this time, around 1.14. Bit of an envelope, bit of resonance. Sine wave to filter cutoff. I'm going to go even slower, so it's going to be oscillating twice over one bar. I'm going to map this to the resonance and have an upward filter. Slow that down a bit. I'm going to turn it down slightly in the mix. And turn the mix of this camel fat down. So that's sounding pretty good. Pretty damn good. Obviously we've got a lot of processing. I'm just going to double click these title bars to hunch them up together. We've got a lot more room. Okay. I'm going to add a vowel filter on vowel mode with the envelope follower activated and band reject on. Makes it a lot more snarly and growly. Okay, I'm going to leave the mid band for now because it's nice and beefy. If we see what it sounded like without these. I'm with them. So at the moment it's got a nice "roo" at the start, like a nice vocal, if you can hear that. So I'm going to accent that when it comes to the highs to sort of follow it on in the same sort of way. Okay, join me in the next part and we'll carry on with some bass processing.